Now, for more on Cuba's changing demographics and its impact on the economy, I spoke to Paolo Spadoni. He's the author of Cuba's Socialist Economy Today, Navigating Challenges and Change. I began by asking how the demographic shift is shaping the country's economy.
Cuba has had very good healthcare indication over the past several decades. So low infant mortality, expectancy of life is very long, similar to developed countries. But at the same time, the economic promise has become more and more visible, meaning one of the biggest promises is that the salary in Cuba, the purchasing power of the salaries is very low. So many people have left the country over the past 25 years, and you also have a shrinking population in working age.
So what do you think would actually bring people back? You talked about people leaving the country. What do you think would really encourage them to come back to Cuba?
Well, people are leaving the country over the past 25 years, mostly for economic reasons, in search of better economic opportunities and increased salaries to take care of their families. So the best way to improve the situation, including the demographic problem, is by increasing the purchasing power of Cuban salaries. Just to keep things in perspective, what a Cubans make today in real terms with his salary is about one-third of what it used to be in 1989. So you have to work really hard to increase productivity and efficiency level in the Cuban economy so the salary of an average Cuban can purchase way more than it has been so far.
Now, you mentioned some of the bright spots in the economy, and we know that tourism really saw a surge, especially as diplomatic relations with the U.S. seemed to thaw. And it wasn't just from U.S. visitors, it was from a lot of people who really still wanted to see the country as unspoiled as possible. But now we're seeing a trend in the other direction. What's happening there?
Well, the overall trend clearly is on the rise, meaning Cuba has just recorded 4 million tourists. That's a record in 2016 and is projected to increase even more in 2017. Now, you can see the early signal of a stagnation in the sense that Canadian tourists for the first time are declining in the early 2017. But the biggest problem, I say, that the expected increase of U.S. tourism, which has materialized so far, might not be so high in the short term, considering that commercial flights from the United States are cutting some of their frequency or using smaller planes. And there's also an uncertain situation with President Trump, and many Cuban Americans with green cards are traveling less to Cuba. So what you see at this moment is a situation where tourism is growing, but it's not growing at the pace that the Cuban government would expect, considering the relaxation or rapprochement with the United States.
Now, let's actually look at the relationship with U.S. President Donald Trump and Cuba. We know that while he was on the campaign trail, he said that he was generally supportive of Barack Obama's Cuba policy. Once elected, he's saying that he actually plans to perhaps roll some of those policies back. He's going to make an announcement in the coming weeks. But so far, what impact has Trump had on Cuba and its economy?
As I said, the travel ban that the Trump administration has tried to pass has kind of put a freeze or a partial freeze on Cuban American visits, in particular to Cuba. The other part that we have to consider that the travel ban still applies to tourism activities. So Americans, if they want to respect the U.S. law, can travel to Cuba under a general license for 12 categories, which do not include tourism. So you have to keep your records for 5 years, so your plane ticket and the schedule of activities. So in the short term, you can see that not many Americans are traveling as the Cuban government was expecting, just because the situation is uncertain. On making a better deal, I have to point out that from a Cuban standpoint, the deal is not as good as they would hope, in the sense that commercial planes from the United States can land in Cuba, but Cuban planes cannot land in the United States. Cuba still has to pay cash for agricultural export from the United States. You still have certain areas where, for instance, U.S. banks can open correspondent accounts in Cuban banks, but that doesn't happen the other way around. So if the Trump administration is hoping to make a better deal, we have to consider that the deal that we have so far on the ground is not that bad.
Now, conversations about a better deal haven't gone so smoothly. We know that President Raul Castro called Trump's trade policies egotistical and his plan to build that wall along the U.S.-Mexico border irrational. So where do things stand for the country if Trump does in fact decide to take a hard line against Cuba?
For me, there's always been a misguided idea in many circles in the United States over the fact that Cuba should reciprocate every opening that the United States makes toward Cuba. From a Cuban standpoint, they see the embargo as a one-way tool, so they simply evaluate the opportunity that are presented to them, and then they make what they feel is the best course of strategies for them. So the idea that you can push Cuba to improve human rights situation, religious rights, and so forth, and expecting concessions on their part, I think is a misguided one.